If there is one constant in self-publishing, it is that with every single book you publish, you learn more things that you didn't know that you didn't know. Last year, I finally published the sequel to my first epic fantasy novel, and this is 15 things you should keep in mind while you're getting your book cover done. Number 1, hire a professional. There are lots of opinions out there on everything that you can spend money on, and there is basically no limit to how much money you can spend when it comes to self-publishing. But if you have very limited amounts of money, my advice is to spend it on your cover. I know professional cover designers are very expensive, but let me put this in context for you. You have spent months, years, decades, your entire life pouring your heart and soul into this manuscript. You are finally ready to put it out into the world. You do not want to half-ass this by slapping a bad cover on it. The cover is how readers are going to encounter your book. Your cover is the first thing that people are going to see. Your cover is going to be more recognizable than your author photo. It is your most important marketing asset by far. And if it is not on point, you are going to be shooting yourself in the foot. Like it or not, readers are going to judge your book by the cover. And if it doesn't pull in the right readers, you are not going to sell any books. There are a lot of cover designers out there, so you do need to do your due diligence. The 3 I can recommend without hesitation are, number 1, Damonza. That is my cover designer. I am very happy with them. They are one of the top cover design firms around for good reason, and I do not hesitate to recommend them to anybody. They're very communicative, very easy to work with, extremely reliable. They are a big firm, so they have lots of other clients, and so there's never any rush on their side to pressure you to finalize the design or whatever. I started the cover design process for this in 2023, and I did not publish the book until 2024. It did not take them a year to design the cover. It was just, I was indecisive. I hadn't finalized my blurb, and they were just happy for me to sit on this for 8, 10 months, however long I needed. If you want to know more detail about their process and what it's like to work with them, then check out my video review. Another top cover design firm that I do recommend is Miblart, not actually sure. They do a lot of other indie covers as well. One that I have on hand that they did do is House of the Rain King by Will Greatwich, and he is very, very happy with the work that they did. The other great thing about Miblart is they have a whole YouTube channel where they show you time lapses of designing covers in various genres, and you can learn a lot from just watching those time lapses, and I will link their channel in the description below. Finally, if you do not have the budget for either Damonza or Miblart, you can try GetCovers. GetCovers is actually owned by Miblart. It's sort of like their training company for new designers, and they have the most affordable professional cover design packages that you will find anywhere. They start as low as $10 US. I pretty much don't know any other places that will do a professional cover for $10 to $35 US. So if you are extremely budget constrained, then check them out. I've not personally used them yet, but I have heard from other authors who have, and when I finally get around to putting out a proper reader magnet, I will probably give GetCovers a go. In getting together your short list of cover designers, make sure you are 100% clear on what their policy is around the use of AI. Generative AI imagery is now everywhere. It has flooded all of the stock image websites. A lot of those websites don't really do anything in terms of ensuring that generative AI assets are properly labeled and disclosed. They're really reliant on whoever's uploading them to be honest and to accurately and completely label everything that is generative AI as such. So just because the no AI filter is turned on doesn't mean that there will actually be no AI in those search results. Worse than that, generative AI functionality has been built into pretty much all of the professional tools and software that cover designers use in order to do their work. So generative fill in Adobe Photoshop, for example, is a functionality that is powered by generative AI. If you are someone who isn't concerned about generative AI being used in your book covers, then you are totally fine. If you are, however, what you want to do is make sure whoever you're hiring has a clearly documented policy around their use of AI, including whether they are using any generative AI functionality in their workflow. You also want to ask them in advance what proof they will be able to provide to you that they did not use any generative AI in producing your book cover. It's not a comfortable conversation to have, but it is a really important one to have. You want to make sure that A, you've done your due diligence with respect to who you're hiring. B, that they're really clear on what your position is when it comes to the use of generative AI in your publishing business, so that you are covered in the event that you get any accusations. And C, in the event, which hopefully will not happen, but in the event it does happen where you get accusations of having used generative AI somewhere in your publishing business, you will either already have or be able to get the necessary evidence to prove that you did not intentionally or knowingly use any generative AI. This is another reason why I decided to go with Damonza. They have a very, very clear AI policy spelled out in their website and in their terms and conditions. In the order form itself, they have a very clear tick box that you can select to opt out of the use of any generative AI. If you do not opt out, they reserve the right to use generative AI at their discretion. It doesn't necessarily mean they will, it just gives them the option to do so. If you have a quite strict stance on the use of AI like I do, then I would also recommend filling out in the order notes that you do not want the use of any generative AI based functions like generative fill. And if you are particularly concerned that they might inadvertently use a stock asset that is generative AI but wasn't properly labeled as such, you can also put in notes there like specifying that they should only be using stock images that have an upload date of before, say, 2021. Both Miblart and GetCovers do not use generative AI, but I don't know if that applies to things like generative fill. You can certainly request that they don't. As with anybody using any sort of stock imagery on the internet, there is always that risk that they might inadvertently grab something that happens to be AI generated but was not properly labeled. If you are curious to hear a professional cover designer's thoughts on the use of AI in book cover design, then I recommend checking out the Q&A that I did with Damonza. Number 3, the purpose of your book cover is to attract the right eyeballs, not to depict the text with 100% accuracy. I know that's hard to get your head around as an author, but unless you are commissioning custom illustrations from a professional artist and then getting a book cover designer to do the typography and layout, you are probably not going to end up with a book cover that is exactly as you envision. And that's okay. As long as it gets across the right vibes, it is doing its job. And it is very important that you keep this in mind as you go through the cover design process, because it will become very, very tempting to ask your cover designer to make all sorts of tiny changes that will not matter to anybody except for you. And like, if you want to pay for those, go for it. But if you are on a budget, honestly, leave it. No potential reader looking at the cover is going to know. Will they notice once they finish the book? Yes. Is it going to be a deal breaker that is going to result in terrible reviews or them not reading the next book? No. So just leave it and save yourself the time and the provision fees. Which brings me to number 4, Premades. Both of my covers started out as Premades. Premades are basically what they sound like. They're pre-made designs that a cover designer has already done the hard work of putting together the imagery, and they have some placeholders for your author name and the title of the book, maybe a series name and some quote text or whatever. These can be a really good bargain if you can find the right one that fits the vibe of your story. Damonza doesn't offer Premades anymore, but back when they did, it was $145 US versus $395 US for the basic ebook cover design package. So it was a huge saving for me. Not every designer offers Premades, but a lot of them do. They'll usually have them listed in a specific section of their website, or they might be posting them in cover design groups that you can find on Facebook. Since these are pre-made, chances are they won't 100% fit what you need, but remember, you just need the right vibe. Number 5, revisions and upcharges. This will vary designer by designer. Most designers will have some sort of clause where they say minor changes, e.g. text changes and such, don't have any additional costs associated with them. If you do have some more involved changes, there usually will be an additional upcharge. Pre-made I started with for this one was actually pretty close to final, so the only major changes that really needed to be done were changing the sky from clouds to putting in this giant moon just for added drama, and to swap out the character on the front for the same character model that was used in the first book so that there was consistency across the series. So those changes honestly didn't cost a lot. Putting in the moon was an additional $45 US. Swapping out the character, I'm guessing it was about $35 US. And I have to guess because I actually requested one other completely unnecessary and stupid change, which we will talk about later. The changes from the pre-made for the first book were actually a lot more extensive because not only did I change the kind of weapons that the character was wielding, I also completely changed the entire background, which basically meant the designer essentially had to redo all of the background from scratch. Given the amount of work, we ended up just taking the pre-made off the market, and then they charged me $395, which was their basic ebook cover design service. Smaller designers, particularly those who are working as individuals, will typically limit it to a set number of rounds. 2 or 3 is the most common that I have seen. And to be honest, that should be all you really need. And if you find that you need more than 2 or 3 rounds of revisions, then something has gone really wrong in the process. Either you haven't hired the right designer or you've given them a bad brief. Which brings me to number 6, communicate in specifics. At the time I was getting the cover design for book 1, I felt like I gave the worst brief in the world. But in reality, it was a much better brief than what I did for book 2. And that was all on me. For book 1, I sent in a draft blurb as well as several comparable covers. For book 2, I got lazy, simply because the pre-made was significantly closer to what I needed it to be. Plus also stupidity, which we will talk about in a little bit. Before you start reaching out to any cover designers, make sure you have your draft blurb and a couple of comparable covers. Don't just do one or the other. Comp covers are really good because they are able to articulate in a visual manner what you're after, especially because if you are not a designer or an artist yourself, you may not really be able to articulate what you really want. Any comments you can give to your designer about what you like and what you don't like on those comp covers are also really, really helpful. The draft blurb is important because not only does it go on the back cover of your book, but if you want your cover to be really on point, it's really going to be the blurb where you're going to be able to convey the right tone and story and character and setting promises of the book that you've written. It doesn't matter if your blurb is not finalized. It doesn't matter if you think it's terrible. What matters is just giving them something for you to really convey the essence of the story that you have written. If your draft blurb is not doing that, then you should probably rework it until it does. If it's sort of like 80% there, I would just go ahead and send it because it'll be good enough for them to get rolling. Number 7, mockups are going to be your friend. Early on the design process for this particular cover, I was kind of worried because it was very monochrome. So I made one of my stupidest requests. I asked my cover designer if they would maybe be able to incorporate some color changes, and I have such regrets. Notice how unspecific this wording is. Here's the thing you really need to internalize. You are their client. They want to make you happy. At the same time, they are also professionals. If you're giving them a terrible brief, they're not going to come out and tell you that you're making a terrible mistake. Sometimes, if you find a designer who is willing to be quite blunt, or if you have established a working relationship with somebody where they know you are going to be receptive to blunt feedback, they will tell you that they do not advise it. But most of the time, they're just going to try and do the best job that they can do with the terrible brief that you've given. So that's what Damonza did. They said, yes, we can absolutely change the color of it for an additional charge because it requires additional work. And this is what they sent back. I'm so embarrassed. Not for them, for me, because this looks absolutely terrible. That was not the only bad suggestion that I made. For some reason, I was so fixated on the fact that the cover was monochrome that I asked if they could change the title text to be a different color from the first book. Just because, just to have the color contrast. And that did not look good either. After that, I was a bit scared and didn't know if I wanted to commit and spend another $45 US to put in a moon. So what I did was try to find some images that I like the look of. And then I just opened up an image editing software and very badly photoshopped in the moon, just so I could play around with how it looked, so I could get a better sense of whether or not that was a change I wanted to make. Being able to do this and see it side by side with the alternatives was really, really helpful for me to confirm that yes, the changing the color was a bad call, but putting a moon in is a great call. That brings us to number 8. Don't micromanage. In suggesting things like, oh, change the color of the sky or change the color of the title text, I was trying to essentially do my cover designer's job when I have no idea about cover design at all. I was trying to play art director, if you will, when I have zero skills and qualifications to be doing that. What I should have done was be honest about the specific concern I had, i.e. that the book might not pop as much within a sea of thumbnails because it was all the one color. That would have then let them come back and say, hey, no, it's gonna be fine. This is what is on trend right now for all the covers. That certainly was the case. Or they might have been able to come up with some other suggestions, but I didn't do that. I just concluded in my head without actually discussing it with them or actually researching what other covers were like in the market and what the market trends were or any of that. I just concluded there was a problem, and then I tried to solve the problem, and in trying to solve the problem, I landed on one specific fix, and my suggestions just made everything worse. It wasted everyone's time, and it was a waste of revision fee. Once you've hired a professional, get out of the way, don't micromanage them, just let them do their job. Which brings me to number 9, relevant expertise. As I said, Damonza does great cover designs. Specifically retail covers, and even more specifically typography. When I look at book covers, I can always tell if somebody has used Damonza because there is something about the way they do layout and typography in a way that really stands out and looks very polished. Because I was launching this on Kickstarter, I was also planning on doing some special editions. And the special editions have these foil stamped leatherette covers. And on the back of it, there's room for a quote. There's like a million things you need to do for a Kickstarter. And so in my head, I was just like, okay, well, I've commissioned the art. Damonza has a typography only package. Let me just get them to do the typography and we'll call it a day. We can just keep everything in the same process, same workflow that I'm already familiar with. However, if you look at Damonza's portfolio, they do not have a single special edition cover in their whole body of work. What I asked them to do was a bit too outside what their usual expertise was, and so the initial concepts that I got back were not good, and I very quickly realized that I shouldn't have asked them to do this job in the first place. What I should have done was approach a cover designer like Rachel Sinclair of Playmore Covers, who specializes in doing this type of cover design. Alas, I did not, and I did not have time to reach out to anybody else. So I ended up breaking the first rule, which is I did the typography myself. This wasn't necessarily a terrible thing, just because there had been such a crunch running up to the Kickstarter that I had already done the typography in the mock-ups of the special editions that were being shown on the Kickstarter page. But I didn't want to just leave it there and call it a day. I wanted my backers to be able to get the best possible books that I knew how to produce. And that's where Facebook came to the rescue. There is a Facebook group which is aimed at helping indie authors who are not professional designers get cover critiques, especially if they're attempting to DIY their own cover. So I posted my attempt in there looking for some critiques, and based on the feedback I got, I made some changes, and I'm very pleased to say that it turned out really well. So if you really can't afford to hire a professional, not even get covers, then I do recommend you join this particular Facebook group and at least post your attempts at cover design in there, because you will get really good quality feedback from professional book cover designers. But believe it or not, that was still not the last stupid mistake I've made, which we're gonna get to real soon. Number 10 is layered PSD files. If at all possible, negotiate with your book cover designer to get a layered PSD file as part of their deliverables. This is going to be so helpful to you, and it can even save you a lot of money because it lets you do things like remove the text, so you can just isolate the cover image, which will make it much easier for you to create things like bookmarks or ads or wallpapers or, you know, social media posts, things like that. It also means in future, you can do any minor changes yourself, like updating the blurb maybe, or which brings me to number 11. Always ask your designer to let you know what fonts they have used for the title, your author name, and for any back cover copy. And if you are particularly budget constrained, when you brief your designer, ask them if they can design your book cover with fonts that are free to use for commercial purposes. Otherwise, having that layered PSD file isn't necessarily going to do you any good if you want to make those minor text changes, because you'll still have to purchase the commercial license for the font in order to make those updates, and the commercial licenses for some fonts can be pretty pricey. If you have done all of these things, then by now you should have what is a pretty much close to final version of your ebook cover that your designer is going to ask you to approve. Before you sign off, make sure you have done the thumbnail test at some point in this process, which is to take your cover, shrink it down to a teeny tiny thumbnail size, and stick that in amongst the thumbnails of all the other comparable books in the same category on Amazon. A good cover that is on market will be legible at thumbnail size, and it will also fit in and look like it belongs with all of the other covers in that same category. A really, really good cover is also going to draw your eye. The last couple of considerations are things you should keep in mind if you are doing print formats in addition to ebooks. And the very top of that list is the templates. If you are self-published, you are most likely doing print versions via some sort of print-on-demand printer, which generally means KDP or IngramSpark. KDP's templates are a bit easier to figure out. IngramSpark's templates they're logical, but it just, you need to read their documentation really, really closely and really pay attention to what the template's asking you to do. But if you are doing something like a Kickstarter, or you decided to go all in and invest in a print run, your offset printer will also have specific templates that they will provide you with. Offset printers will generally also assign you a dedicated sales rep, and they will also have their own designers on staff who will be able to check all of the files that you provide them and let you know if there are any mistakes. Print on demand doesn't have that. For my retail hardcovers, I wanted to take the foil stamp design that I had on my special editions and have an unfold version printed on the case laminate as a separate under the jacket design. If you are doing a hardcover with KDP, you will not be able to do a dust jacket. There are other printers out there, like BookVault is becoming very popular, though I personally don't recommend them at the moment, and I will tell you why when I get around to filming my BookVault review video. But for the most part, we're working with KDP or IngramSpark. I personally don't do any print editions through KDP anymore. If you are printing your hardcovers with IngramSpark, you have the option of adding on a dust jacket. Note that every additional format that you get done generally requires separate design files to be provided. So you will need your designer to provide an additional case laminate design file as well as a dust jacket design. And because every printer has their own individual templates and paper thicknesses and therefore spine thicknesses will vary across printers, if you plan on printing with KDP as well as IngramSpark, then you need a set of KDP templates as well as a set of IngramSpark templates. Damonza charges about $150 for each additional file format that they have to provide, so it can add up really, really quick. That's why on the first book I just replicated the same art on the case as well as the dust jacket. This was one of my regrets, that I was not able to do a separate under the jacket design for the hardcover. For my second book though, I had learned a couple of tricks. Since I already had this beautiful hardcover case design that was foil stamped on the special editions, I wanted to keep that separate under the jacket design on my retail hardcovers as well. If your designer agrees to provide you with the layered PSD, and if you're willing to spend a little bit of time learning how to use a design program, ask your designer to do the design work for the file format that has the highest resolution and the most design work involved. In my case, that was going to be the dust jacket. My hardcovers are a 6x9 trim size, whereas my paperbacks are 5x8. So this means I could just pay $150 for the IngramSpark dust jacket design, and then I was able to replicate that across to the other formats and save myself a couple $100. I'm not gonna lie, it was very fiddly. For me, it was worth it because there was no design work that was really involved. It was literally just formatting an existing design for different printers. And it was like nudging things a couple of pixels over, that kind of work. I do not need to be paying a professional cover designer $150 to do that. I can do that myself. Speaking of the templates, the one template that I see people tripping up on in particular is the hardcover template. On a case laminate hardcover, the design is printed on a thicker sheet of paper, which is then glued down to the cover boards. And then the inside of it, you'll see, is glued down over the edges on all four sides. When you're looking at this template, this blue border around the whole design, that is the part that gets glued down over onto the inside. Pink areas are what's known as the safe areas, and they're what you are actually going to visually see when you look at the front, the spine, and the back. You need to be accounting for that design and accounting for the margin that you want from the edges when you're just looking at one side of the book, like the front, the spine, or the back. You need to allow for whatever gap you want to be inside that pink area. Otherwise, if you put your design right to the edges of that pink area and assume that the blue area is the margin, it is going to print out with your design going right to the edge. My other regret was not thinking about how my book would look from the spine. Most most of the time that people encounter your book in print format, it is not going to get the face out treatment at the library or at any bookstore if you have somehow managed to convince a bookstore to carry your book. People are going to be browsing the shelves and they're going to see it like this. And how boring is this? I honestly don't think anybody walking past this on the shelf would be compelled to even pull this out to look at the front cover or read the blurb on the back, which means nobody coming across my book at the library or at a bookstore that happens to have it on the shelf is going to actually pick up my book and read it. So when I was doing the second book, I thought about trying to do something different with the spine like I'd seen on some other indie books where they basically take the central image on the front cover and they shrink it right down and they put it right at the top of the spine so it catches the eye and everything else gets bumped down. If it's a series, they usually put what book in the series it is. And to finish it all off, the more professional looking ones generally also put some sort of publisher logo right at the bottom of the spine. This was very tempting to me, but ultimately I decided against it because of print on demand tolerances. Books that are printed on demand are not going to be subject to as fine a degree of quality control as offset printed books. IngramSpark and KDP both have their own level of tolerances for how much shifting of the design can occur. IngramSpark's file creation guide allows for about 2 millimeters, while KDP's guidelines actually allow for up to 3.2 millimeters. So if you have a spine design where there is some sort of high contrast element involved, like say putting the core image from the front cover on the top of the spine, then any shifts that do happen will be pretty apparent to the eye and you will not be able to claim them as manufacturing defects unless they fall outside of those specified tolerance levels. So I opted for a simpler solution. I took inspiration from the Cradle series and added a book-specific sigil to the top of the spine. They're similar but different across the books in the series so that you can see they kind of all belong together. And I also added a publisher seal at the very bottom of the spine, both to add visual interest as well as to hint at the East Asian inspired fantasy setting. Fixing the spine came with one major drawback. As a reader, there is nothing that bugs me more than the publisher deciding to change the cover design partway through a series, and then I end up with books on my shelf that don't match. And I'm not alone. To make sure the readers who supported me by buying the first book in the first edition, I offer Legacy Edition. It's basically an edition that's got the old spine design. I do this by setting up the Legacy Editions as separate titles in IngramSpark, and I make sure that they are not enabled for distribution. This allows me to upload the different files. It allows me also to not have the Legacy Editions in public circulation, so the only way that a reader can get their hands on a set is to buy them from me directly. It also means that I don't have to use an ISBN on them because they will assign you a non-ISBN identifier. My final tip is whenever you're trying something new, always make sure to get proof copies. Proof copies can be expensive and there is a turnaround involved, but if you were trying something new, I think it is critical that you actually get yourself proof copies. It also helps if you actually listen to the experts that you're working with when they give you subtle hints that what you're thinking of might not actually turn out so great. But I'm a bit stubborn, and instead of considering the limitations of printing on a hardcover case laminate, I was just like, no, it's fine. I did mock-ups which were really convincing on the computer, so it should print out great, right? No, it really did not. And it took me until the proof copies to see that I had made a really big mistake. These are my special editions, which are foil stamped on leatherette. And what I wanted to do was to carry over this art that I had commissioned onto my retail editions. For whatever reason, I was really fixated on trying to replicate this as closely as possible. Here is my first attempt. You can see there is a holographic foil effect that I did in a graphics program, which I don't know if you can see how bad this looks on camera. It probably doesn't look that bad to you, but trust me, in person, it is just awful because you can tell that the changes in color are not because this is actually foiled, it's because somebody made it change colors in Photoshop, and it does not look good. Also, I was still figuring out the template. This is how badly things were aligned on the first proof copy that I got of the first book. You can also kind of see that here, the leather texture I had in the background didn't really print that well, and so I wanted to bring that out a bit more. You would think this would be a wake-up call to listen to what my artist and my cover designer had been telling me, i.e. that the art I was putting on the case was already pretty intricate, but that subtle hint just kind of flew right over my head, and so I doubled down and decided, no, I'm gonna try again. Apparently my only conclusion was, the holographic foil effect looks good on screen, just not in person, so evidently what I needed to do was change it to silver foil. So I tried again. You can see I've now made it a silver foil effect, which is slightly better than the weird holographic foil effect. And you can see also the leather texture is much more pronounced here. But at the same time, this is a gloss finish and it's just extremely shiny. When you are physically looking at this in person and you are holding it in your hand, your eyes are trying to tell you that it is leather, but your hands, like, you know this is not leather. This is clearly leather. You can touch it, you can feel it. This is not. It's like the book is trying really, really hard to lie to you, and that is not the impression that I wanted people to have. So then I tripled down and decided that the problem wasn't my terrible idea. The problem was obviously I hadn't picked the right finish. That is what I tried to do here with the third round of proofs, and I don't know, it's kind of better, but it's also kind of not. The leather texture still doesn't look very good. And the background is also quite busy, especially with the art itself already being quite intricate. I really, really hate the matte finish from print-on-demand printers. This feels horrible. There's like a rubbery texture to it. It feels cheap. And it is cheap because if you look at the spine, you can see the matte finish already cracking along the spine here. By this point, I had spent hundreds of dollars on proof copies, and I was finally forced to come to my senses and admit that I was wrong. I had a terrible idea. I needed to keep it simple, as my cover artist and my cover designer had been blatantly hinting to me. This is what I ended up doing for my retail editions. It is just the cover art that I commissioned on a plain black background with the gloss finish and no texture on it. I did keep the silver foil effect just so it would look a little bit visually more interesting and not so flat, and it looks good. That is it for this video. If you found my content helpful and you do plan to use Damonza to do your book cover designs, consider using my affiliate link, which is in the description below. You'll get a small discount and I'll get a small fee, which goes towards supporting this channel and helping me make more helpful content like this for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.